Well, speaking of the U.S. and bilateral relations, let's now take you to New York, where G20 Sherpa Zane Dangor is addressing the UN member states for their annual G20 briefing. Let's listen in.
For this opportunity to brief the United Nations General Assembly on our priorities for our presidency of the G20. It is indeed an historical moment. It's a first for the African continent. I want to start off by quoting President Nelson Mandela, who said the following: "As long as poverty, injustice, and gross inequality persist in our world, none of us can truly rest. We shall never forget how millions of people around the world joined us in solidarity to fight the injustice of our oppression. Those efforts paid off, and we are able to stand here and join the millions around the world in support of freedom against poverty." These words by our former president underpins and resonates with our chosen theme for our presidency, which is, as the president has pointed out, solidarity, equality, and sustainability. We therefore feel that we have a significant moral obligation and responsibility to advance these ideals. We also take our cue from the General Assembly Resolution 71/327, entitled "The United Nations in Global Economic Governance," adopted on 11 September 2017, where the General Assembly, amongst others, and I quote, "welcomed the practice of informal engagement between the United Nations and intergovernmental groupings that make policy recommendations or take policy decisions with global implications, including the G20 through informal briefings organized at the initiative of the President of the General Assembly." So we really thank you again, Mr. President. As that resolution quite correctly stipulates, the purpose of this interaction is to, amongst others, promote transparency and coherence, as well as strengthening mutual understanding and cooperation in matters of global economic governance. Let me from the onset reiterate that for South Africa, the United Nations and the General Assembly, with its universal representation, where every country participates on an equal footing, is and will always remain the chief deliberative and policy-making organ of the United Nations. In this respect, the work being done in the G20 and informal grouping seeks to support, contribute to, and reinforce the reform efforts of already existing processes of the United Nations and its organs in a complementary manner rather than pursuing parallel processes. We're very aware of the need not to ensure more fragmentation of the international organizations. The Pact of the Future, adopted at the UN Summit of the Future in 2024, presents a significant opportunity to revitalize global governance. We are working to ensure that the actions of the Pact of the Future are integrated into the G20 agenda to ensure its full implementation. We highly appreciate the leadership role that you, Mr. President, is playing in driving the Pact implementation, including the dialogue on the means of implementation that will be held this week. Distinguished delegates, as we convene here, we are in the midst of what the United Nations Secretary General has referred to as a global polycrisis. The interconnected nature of the threats facing humanity today, poverty, inequality, hunger, ever escalating geopolitical tensions, fragmentation, global warming, pandemics, energy and food insecurities, but also rising intolerance and armed conflict, is causing further hardship and suffering. These challenges are jeopardizing our collective future, particularly our future generations. One of the greatest impediments to growth, development, and stability is the persistence of inequality within and between countries. Further, we are in a race against time to meet the deadline that we have set for ourselves to reach the 17 Sustainable Development Goals. In this address at the G20 high-level opening session in New York in September 2024, our President Cyril Ramaphosa remarked and said the following: with less than 6 years to go before the 2030 deadline for the achievement of the UN Agenda for Sustainable Development, we are at a crucial inflection point in humankind's history. He continued by saying the following: the imperative of sustainable development has become all the more crucial. It cannot be business as usual. It cannot be more platitudes and empty promises. Given these circumstances, the theme that we have put forward, we feel, is appropriate. And I repeat, that theme is solidarity, equality, and sustainability. Through solidarity, we seek to achieve a future that is people-centered, development-oriented, and inclusive. In an interconnected world, the challenges faced by one nation affects all of us. It affects all nations. By advancing equality, we seek to ensure fair treatment, opportunities, and the advancement of all individuals, peoples, and nations, irrespective of the economic status, gender, race, geographic location, or any other characteristics. With sustainability, we seek to meet the needs of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their needs. Interwoven in this theme is the African philosophy of Ubuntu, which underpins our leadership and vision for our presidency. The spirit of Ubuntu, the profound belief, and it's not just a South African belief, it's an Africa-wide custom and belief, is I am because we are. Further reminds us of the interconnectedness of humanity. Likewise, our challenges can only be resolved through cooperation, not conflict, collaboration and partnership, because no challenge and no triumph exists in isolation. They require responses that are inclusive and coordinated. Cooperation is our greatest strength and our most powerful tool. Distinguished delegates, South Africa's G20 priorities and deliverables are aligned to the original G20 mandate many years ago that spoke of promoting strong, sustainable, and balanced inclusive growth. We have 4 overarching priorities that seek to address these challenges, and these challenges stifle the abilities of all of us, in particular the Global South, to achieve our desired levels of growth and development. So we will be working to strengthen disaster resilience and responses. We are also focusing on means to ensure debt sustainability for low-income countries. And here we are particularly focused on looking at the cost of capital for African and other developing countries. As was been pointed earlier, the aim here is to develop a comprehensive strategy to assess why we have significant costs of capital for some countries in a manner that inhibits their development potential. We also seek to mobilize finance for a just energy transition. We've put on the agenda as well the need to harness critical minerals for inclusive growth and sustainable development. South Africa is also taking forward the outcomes of the 2024 report of the UN Secretary General's panel on critical energy transition minerals. We have 3 task forces. It may sound a lot, but it actually seeks to integrate all of these goals that I've just spoken about. So we have a task force that will focus on inclusive economic growth, industrialization, and reduced inequality. And this is also taking further the work that has been done by Indonesia, India, and Brazil. Similarly, we'll be taking forward some of the work done by Brazil on food security through a task force. We will also have a task force dealing with artificial intelligence, data governance, and innovation for sustainable development. Essentially, how do we use AI for the common good? Additional imperatives under our presidency include a broadened compact with Africa, and this will build on the German G20's President's Compact with Africa, and we seek to make it more African and also to focus on the deliverables that have been planned all those many years ago. We will also be doing a review of the work of the G20. This is not to change the nature of the G20. It's going to be just a reflection on the key achievements over the last 20 years, what has worked, what has not worked, so that we could improve the work of future presidencies of the G20. As I've said, we will be building on the successes of the past 3 presidencies led by the Global South, Indonesia in 2022, India in 2023, and of course Brazil in 2024. We will be championing the reform of the multilateral trading system and the international financial architecture, including strengthening of multilateral development banks. We seek to address the challenge of climate change, which is important. We seek to promote diversity, equity, and inclusion. We will be advocating for gender equality, and we will be pursuing enhanced international tax cooperation, and we will seek to address illicit financial flows. Your Excellencies, 2025 will mark the 80th anniversary of the United Nations and its lodestar document, the UN Charter, and it's also the 20th anniversary of the World Summit on Social Development. In South Africa, we are celebrating the 7th anniversary of what is called the Freedom Charter, which is a cornerstone of our democratic constitution. It was the basis of our constitutions. We believe that these anniversaries provide us with the opportunity to assess progress, challenges, and propose solutions, both for the present and the future. South Africa strongly believes that we need to strengthen the multilateral system and enhance international cooperation to solve the complex challenges facing the world. The erosion of multilateralism, as has been pointed out earlier, presents a threat to global growth and stability, and we should all vigorously contest this. It is thus imperative that we place the respect for the purposes and principles of the UN Charter, including international law, international humanitarian law, and human rights, at the center of all our discussions on the global geopolitical situation. We must also appreciate that the world today is a different place compared to what it was in 1945, when the UN was established. Today, most UN member states are from the developing world, formerly colonized countries. We thus need to amplify the call for the UN to be reformed and made fit for purpose for today's realities. This includes the revitalization of the General Assembly, the revitalization of ECOSOC, and the reform of the United Nations Security Council. Your Excellencies, we welcome the African Union's inclusion in the G20, which is an important opportunity to amplify Africa's voice in global economic governance while ensuring that the development priorities of the African continent and the global South find expression firmly and permanently onto the agenda of the G20. As a group representing 80% of the world's population and 85% of global GDP, the G20 does have a role to play in terms of providing impetus in pursuit of solutions to address some of the urgent challenges confronting humanity and the planet. South Africa also notes the complementarities and synergies between our G20 presidency, the Pact of the Future, the FFD4 process, the Second World Summit for Social Development, and COP30. The G20 has held discussions on FFD4 and is considering the opportunity to contribute constructively to ambitious outcomes to close the sustainable development financing gap and reform the international financial architecture. The United Nations and the G20 cannot work in isolation. So South Africa is championing cooperation, collaboration, and partnerships between countries, individuals, and groups during our presidency. There should be a collective recognition that the United Nations remains the most relevant global and international platform for tackling the many challenges we face, and also the threats to peace and security, to addressing poverty and development, and ensuring the protection of all human rights for all people. Strengthening cooperation between the G20 and the UN is essential to foster coherence and synergy between both agendas. The conflicts in Africa, the conflicts in Europe and the Middle East continue to exact a huge human toll and heightens global insecurity. As the international community, we must continue to advocate for diplomatic solutions. Inclusive dialogue is the foremost guarantor of sustainable, lasting peace. In New Delhi, the leaders stated the following: all states must refrain from threat or use of force to seek territorial acquisition against the territorial integrity and sovereignty or political independence of any state. The threat or the use of nuclear weapons is inadmissible. They also stated very clearly that today's era must be that of peace. In fact, they said peace is the path, not that there is a path to peace, because it was the sense of the discussions there that war could also be seen as a path to peace. South Africa has shown firm resolve in our own foreign policy by promoting the principles of justice, solidarity, equality, peace, and respect, underpinned by our commitment to human dignity and to leaving no one behind. We see the G20 summit in November 2025 as a forum where cooperation and collaboration amongst global leaders will be taken to a high level. This, we hope, will be our enduring legacy in the G20. I want to conclude, Your Excellencies, by reminding this gathering of the remarks delivered again by former President Nelson Mandela at the UN World Summit for Social Development 20 years ago, when he said the following: "We are gathered here to answer one question: how does humanity cooperate to build a better life for all?" If this question sounds trite in its simplicity and too familiar in its rhyme, it's because this challenge has been with us for millennia. We either rise together as humanity or together we fall. Mr. President, Your Excellencies, I thank you for your attention and look forward to engaging further.
I thank the Sherpa of the Group of 20 of South Africa.
All right, so that address there by Zane Dangor, the DG of the Department of International Relations here in South Africa, as well as the G20 Sherpa. And concluding his address there at the UN's annual G20 briefing in New York, he started off by saying, of course, that reminding UN members just about the importance of South Africa's G20 presidency, saying that it's not only just important but also historic. He's quoted, interestingly enough, from the former President Nelson Mandela, both in his opening remarks as well as his closing, speaking, of course, on a number of issues, including there on funding issues as well as geopolitical uncertainty in the global geopolitical uncertainty, of course, saying that on conflicts, saying that these are heightened by global insecurity. He is there with the delegation in New York. As South Africa, he is also expected to host a number of meetings, as well as expected to meet the Deputy Secretary General Amina Mohammed during this particular visit. Of course, you would recall the UN Deputy Secretary General was also here in South Africa not too long ago, speaking, of course, about the importance of international cooperation to address global economic challenges, something also that was mentioned there by Zane Dangor, including, of course, South Africa focusing on 4 key areas, saying that there are 3 task teams that have been implemented to look at some of these key focus areas whilst South Africa has the G20 presidency. All right, we'll look at this and other stories we are monitoring for you and tracking for you in as far as geopolitical, especially matters are concerned. You will recall, of course, earlier on, the Deputy Minister of DIRCO, Alvin Boot, is also speaking at a symposium here in Johannesburg about foreign policy. The event is being held together with the South African Institute of International Affairs. So a number of discussions then as we look at certain issues that are facing South Africa, particularly as it speaks to the US-SA relations that many are saying, simply put, is in a downward spiral.